Arturia just released a new soft synth, and this really is a fun one. The Synthx is an accurate emulation of the Elka Synthex, a beautiful analog synth that I'm particularly fond of for a few reasons, including the fact that I'm Italian. Elka was an Italian company, and while not as famous as the brands that dominated the market at the time, Roland, Moog, Oberheim, the Synthx is a bit of Italian engineering we are very proud of. It's the brainchild of amazing designer Mario Maggi. The Synthx is responsible for many sounds in the classic 1986 Jean-Michel Jarre album Rendez-Vous and many other 80s records, but this synth sounds so beautiful, so lush, so cinematic that I just can't wait to use it in modern productions. Thank you so much, Arturia, for giving me early access to the synth. I'm going to start playing some of my favorite presets, and then we can have a first look at the synth's layout. I really like the layout of the original Synthx. It's cluttered and busy, but it's very clear. It's just very 80s in a way. It's kind of a button-heavy synth. If you know what I mean, there are buttons for things that you would normally expect to have knobs, but it's kind of interesting and cool. The original had 8-voice polyphony. This one has 16, but it is a dual-layer synth, so that really means that it's 8 voices for each layer. Basically, you can program two sounds and blend them together, which is really cool. We'll explore this option a bit more later on in the video. Let's have a look or a listen to the raw voice of the synth. Of course, there is shape and octave control. You have triangular and sawtooth. And then you have the square wave, which can become a pulse wave, of course. And you have octave control with independent transposition for the two oscillators in the synth. There are already here a couple of fun things that we can explore. The first one is that each oscillator has ring mod, which is pretty cool. And the other one, and I don't know of another synth architecture that does this, but if I'm wrong, please do let me know in the comments. I'd love to know, is that each oscillator can work as a modulation source to modulate the pulse width modulation of the other. So this is essentially audio rate pulse width modulation. And obviously the shape that you choose for the other oscillator, in this case oscillator 2, has an influence on the overall sound, even if its volume is all the way down. Let's try it. Very interesting. The synth sounds big, nice, very warm. The original Synthx had DCOs, digitally controlled analog oscillators. This was really massive back in the days, as it meant you didn't have to wait for the tuning routine before you played it, but more importantly, it meant that the oscillators would stay in tune. Let's talk about the filter. The filter in the original Synthx was multi-mode, which made it more complex compared to the other competitors like the Prophet, for example. You have a 24 dB per octave low-pass filter, a 6 and 12 dB bandpass filters, and a 12 dB per octave high-pass filter. There are two different low-pass modes here. That's because Arturia added that 12 dB per octave low-pass, which is quite handy. Let's try a few of them. So that'd be the 24 and this is the 12. Which is obviously gentler. And then let's try the two bandpass. And here's the high pass. I'm always happy when I get a high-pass filter in my hands because you can actually use its resonance as a bass boost. So the way it works is that you can crank the resonance all the way up. It kind of self-resonates and then, there you go, and then you tune the frequency to your fundamental. Somewhere around here, and then you put the keyboard to maybe 1, between 1 and 2. And here you get this really cool boost. And then you bring the resonance down. Not bad for being completely raw voices. Synthx has two dedicated envelopes for amp and filter that can be quite snappy, not surprisingly, considering the bass sounds with sharp attack that made this synth famous. So let's try one for the bass. I have on low pass 1, which is the 24 dB per octave option. Let's get a bit more release. And another little addition that I appreciate is the velocity control over here that allows you to modulate the envelope amount with the strength you hit the keys with. It makes it really expressive and playable. So if I go all the way up, I'm pressing very lightly. I don't get any filter envelope. The harder I play, the more the filters open. There are more velocity-based things you can do, which is really cool. I will find more about that when we're going to explore the advanced menu. The synth has also a really nice sounding unison. It stacks 5 voices together, and I really invite you to play with the spread knob over here when you're in unison mode, as it pans the voices around the stereo field in a very cool way, and it sounds really beautiful and open. In fact, let's try it right away. Let's set up unison mode. Now the synth obviously becomes monophonic, and I can spread the voices here. Very rich. If you don't want to use up voices, the Synthx has you covered with this very nice 3 presets chorus, which I really love the sound of. This is an accurate reproduction of the original one. It's not tweakable at all. You don't have control over any of the parameters. There are 3 modes which go from subtle to intense, and that's it. But I do think they all sound great. And here's chorus number 1. Kind of subtle, and 3. The first mode has only 1 chorus voice, while mode 2 and 3 both have 2 voices, but with different delay settings. Just a note that I am on purpose playing these completely dry with no reverb whatsoever, just so that we can focus on the very raw voice of the synth, which I think sounds really big and nice. 2 is probably my favorite. Let's move to the modulation section. Here on the top left, there is this layer-specific LFO, which is really well designed. I think it's all very self-explanatory, so I won't be spending too much time on this one. But of course, you have all the different waveform options. You have reset and sync. And at the bottom, you have all the possible destination. You'll see that you have 2 different depth controls over here. And the reason, and again, I think this was very clever design for the time, is that in this way, each one controls half of the destination. You'll see that this first 4 destination has depth 1 and the last 3 have depth 2. And this essentially gave you a little bit more flexibility, as you could choose multiple destination for your LFO, but as long as they were in different groups, you'd have independent depth control. Note that on top of the layer LFO, you also have a master LFO down here, and this works on a global basis. It would be the one to use if, for example, you wanted to program some vibrato. Let's try both these LFOs quickly. First thing I'm going to do is going to set oscillator 1 to pulse width, and let's get rid of the volume on oscillator 2 just for a second. And I'm going to set up the layer A LFO because we are on A, more about the dual layer option later on. And I'm going to set this to pulse width 1. So I'm going to get rid of oscillator 1 and 2, and now I should get the LFO modulating the pulse width here. And let's increase depth. Very nice. You'll see that depth 2 is set to filter, so let's just try that. I'm going to close the cutoff and increase the depth. Very nice. Reset, of course, toggles between resetting LFO every time you press the note or free running. And on this same sound, let's try and add a bit of vibrato on the global master LFO. So I'm just gonna add some pitch depth. And this is obviously hardwired to the mod wheel, so I need to increase the mod wheel to hear its effect. And here it is. And here it sets also to amp, so it does also a bit of tremolo, so let's get rid of that. And let's decrease the frequency. And here's some subtle vibrato. Very nice. I briefly mentioned at the beginning that the Synthx has two-layer architecture, which is really fun. You have the AB layer, a switch, which is both up here and down here. And the way it works is really quite simple. There are three different modes here in layer control, which are all fairly self-explanatory, I think. So with solo, in solo mode, only the active panel is playing. With duo, both panels are playing, they're blend together, and they play at the same time. Stereo link is probably the most interesting option, the one that I love the most, where the two panels are playing together, but they are hard panned left and right. Let's try the stereo link mode right away. I'm gonna make a very basic pad sound for this, so let's increase the amp envelope first. Something like this should work, and I'm gonna close the filter and get quite a bit of envelope. And I'm gonna do something similar for the filter envelope. It should work. Actually, let's try it with the low pass 2 option, which is a little bit brighter. And maybe I can add a tiny bit of noise. Nice, and now I can use this copy setting A to B over here. So now layer B is identical to layer A. You have this kind of cool color coding where layer B is green and layer A is blue. And now if I put this into duo, you'll see that I basically hear the sound twice, so it's twice as loud. But if I go in stereo link, you have this kind of very beautiful stereo panning, which is really good. Let's add a bit of chorus. The nice thing about the stereo link mode is that you have this kind of natural minor drift of the oscillators happening in stereo, which is really lovely for pads and cinematic soundscapes. A small tip, I find this particularly nice if you have high settings for the vintage knob, as this basically increases dispersion for all parameters and makes the voices all a bit different. I think that now it is time to try a little bit of effects. We'll talk a bit more in detail about this, but let's add a bit of reverb because I can't hear this without a beautiful reverb. Very cool. And now we just tease these essentially, but in typical Arturia's fashion, the advanced tab opens up a world of possibilities that bring their classic emulations into the modern times, with more than one twist this time, I must say. The first one is this multi-arp, this multi-arpeggiator that in the Synthx is really special. The multi-arp consists in 4 different independent sequences that can be assigned to either of the 2 layers or to both. That means that you can really create intricate patterns that go far beyond typical arpeggiator uses. Let's give this a try. So a couple of cool things here are that the modes, first of all, are a lot more than the classic up, down, and random. So you see I have really a lot of different things. Let's try creative groove, for example. And then, of course, the rhythm can be fully customized as well. So let's try something funky. You have independent rate multipliers for the rhythms. And then, as I was saying, basically each arpeggiator can be applied either to only one of the two layers. Now here, for example, we have on the left layer B, which is not being arpeggiated. And then you have on the right layer A, which instead is being arpeggiated, or you can have it on both. And the cool thing is that the arpeggiator can also be offset. So for example, I can have two different sequences happening at the same time. So let's try something pretty random just to have some fun. And I can have, for example, one on A and one on B. So again, this lets you create some really intricate layer sounds that come in gradually, almost in counterpoint. This is really one of the most fun that I've had with an arpeggiator, I must say. And you have 4 of those, so really the possibilities are infinite. And of course, I am trying pretty random stuff here, but let's try one of the factory sequences. Very cool. Very nice. Let's turn the multi-arpeggiator off for a second and let's move into the effects. The effects are taken from the Arturia's arsenal. So if you're familiar with the effects selection in Pigments, for example, you'll be right at home here. I do appreciate the GUI update of the effects tab compared to older products in the Arturia catalog. It feels very modern, clean, it's really a pleasure to use. I have some delay and some reverb set up here. But you have, for example, the Juno 8 chorus, which is a big favorite of mine. Let's get rid of the built-in chorus and let's try this instead. Really nice. And let's try some of the distortion algorithms. Some really cool stuff. The modulation section also goes well beyond the couple of extras, LFOs and envelopes that some older models have. Here there are 3 extra slots that can be envelopes, complex functions, random functions, or sequencers. Paired with the onboard modulations possibilities, they make Synthx a really super versatile instrument capable of some truly complex sounds. I'm not going to go very much in depth in this because this is a first look, but just know that there is a lot of fun to be had and you can really program some very complex sounds. Last but absolutely not least, Synthx has probably the most expressive set of controls I've seen on an Arturia classic synth to date. And as the owner of an Osmos, this makes me very excited. I'm really happy things are kind of moving in this direction. Together with the usual keyboard settings and modulation options over here, velocity, mod wheel, aftertouch, and key tracking, Synthx has a few extra bits that are really interesting. Let's have a look. First of all, it's worth mentioning that Synthx accepts Poly Aftertouch. So if I go over here on Aftertouch and I assign it to something basic, like the cutoff frequency, and I bring it all the way down, now I have Poly Aftertouch controlling the frequency. It's cool and really expressive. Then on top of velocity, Synthx also has release velocity as a modulation source, which is really cool. This measures how quickly a key is released, which adds a nice extra layer of control. For example, let's try and assign this to a transpose of oscillator 1, and let's bring it all the way down. So in this way, if I press a note and then release it very gently, I had this kind of very subtle pitch down effect. And you hear that the fastest I release the note, the more I have almost an octave down effect. I mean, this is really cool. I never tried anything like this, and I need to kind of get some thought of what's the best way to program a sound that makes it very interesting, but I just love it. It's a great idea. And then last, we have this MPE slide, which is also really cool. So MPE slide, it kind of depends on the sort of MPE controller that you have. The Rolly keyboard, for example, for MPE slide has the horizontal sliding across the keyboard, which something like the Osmose doesn't have because it has a more traditional keyboard layout, but it sort of uses the aftertouch, which is not quite an aftertouch in the Osmose, the same way that the Rolly keyboard uses MPE slide. Don't want to get into that because we're not talking about the Osmose, but it's very interesting. And let's just try and program something with this. So for example, I'm going to bring the envelope control for the filter all the way down, and let's assign some MPE slide to opening the filter, maybe something like that. You see that this is not the same as the aftertouch because this starts opening the filter from the moment I press down the key, not once I reach the aftertouch threshold. Much more continuous. And for example, I can add a bit of vibrato. Let's add MPE slide to master LFO and to controlling the pitch. So the more I press, the more I have like a very subtle vibrato. Let's get even less, and let's do it slightly slower. It makes for a very, very expressive instrument. I can't wait to dig deeper and start programming my own sounds with this. It's really, really fun to program. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm really digging the Synthx. I'd say this is hands down the best software emulation of the Synthx I've ever tried. It models the original hardware unit very well, and it expands it with some amazing features that make it actually not only a very capable synth, but also a pretty versatile one. Thank you so much for watching me, and thanks again Arturia for my copy of Synthx. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel for more. I'll see you next time.